The Crimean War began in October 1853 and lasted until March 1856. It was a conflict that involved some of the most powerful nations of Europe, including the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, Britain, France, and later Sardinia. The war is remembered not only for the battles and strategies, but also for the human suffering, the introduction of modern warfare techniques, and the way it changed international relations in Europe. To understand why the war began, it is important to look at the political situation in Europe during the mid-19th century. The Ottoman Empire, which had once been a dominant power, was now in decline. European nations referred to it as the sick man of Europe. Its territories in the Balkans and the Middle East were unstable, and local populations were often restless. Russia saw an opportunity to expand its influence over the Ottoman territories, particularly because it sought access to warm water ports and the Black Sea, which would allow it to trade more easily with the Mediterranean. Tensions also arose over religious authority. Russia claimed it had a right to protect Orthodox Christians living in the Ottoman Empire. France, on the other hand, supported the rights of Roman Catholics in the Holy Land, which was under Ottoman control. These disputes over religion, influence, and territory created a situation that could easily escalate into war. In October 1853, Russian forces crossed the Danube River and invaded Ottoman territory in the Balkans. The Ottomans, who were weaker militarily and less organized, struggled to resist. This invasion marked the official beginning of the Crimean War. News of the Russian advance alarmed Britain and France, who feared that Russia might become too powerful and upset the balance of power in Europe. In March 1854, Britain and France declared war on Russia. Both countries sent troops to support the Ottoman Empire and protect their own interests in the region. Later, in 1855, the Kingdom of Sardinia also joined the Allies. The war was not fought only in the Balkans. The main theater of the conflict became the Crimean Peninsula, a region located on the northern coast of the Black Sea, which provided Russia with critical ports and strategic positions. The journey to Crimea was difficult for all armies involved. Soldiers faced long marches, harsh weather, and logistical challenges. Supplies had to be transported across seas and over difficult terrain. Many soldiers were ill-prepared for the harsh winter conditions and the muddy, cold fields where battles would take place. One of the first major engagements was the Battle of Alma in September 1854. British, French, and Ottoman forces fought against Russian troops near the Alma River in Crimea. Despite the difficult terrain, the Allied forces managed to push back the Russian army. This victory boosted the morale of the Allies and allowed them to move closer to the city of Sevastopol, Russia's most important naval base on the Black Sea. Sevastopol would become the center of a long and grueling siege. The city was heavily fortified with walls, towers, and strong artillery. Russian defenders prepared for a long struggle, while the Allies brought in large numbers of troops, engineers, and artillery to breach the defenses. The siege of Sevastopol lasted from October 1854 until September 1855, almost a full year. Life for soldiers on both sides was extremely harsh. Trenches were dug, mud and rain made conditions miserable, and diseases such as cholera and dysentery spread rapidly. Many more soldiers died from illness than from combat. The living conditions were difficult, with soldiers exposed to cold, hunger, and exhaustion on a daily basis. During the siege, several important battles occurred, including the Battle of Balaclava in October 1854. This battle is famous for the charge of the Light Brigade, a cavalry attack by British forces that became a symbol of courage and tragic loss. The charge was brave, but poorly coordinated, resulting in heavy casualties. It demonstrated both the bravery of soldiers and the dangers of miscommunication in war. Another significant battle was the Battle of Inkerman in November 1854. Russian forces attempted to break the siege, but British and French soldiers defended their positions despite fog, rain, and exhaustion. These battles showed the determination of both sides and the human cost of war. The Crimean War also marked important changes in military medicine and logistics. Florence Nightingale, a British nurse, became famous for her work caring for wounded soldiers. She introduced hygiene practices, organized hospitals, and improved conditions for the sick and injured. Her work saved thousands of lives and laid the foundation for modern nursing. Across the Allied armies, soldiers struggled with inadequate clothing, poor food, and long waits in trenches. Letters from the front described the constant rain, mud, and cold, as well as the fear and anxiety of battle. Civilians in nearby towns also suffered, with homes damaged and resources scarce. The long siege finally ended in September 1855 when Allied forces captured Sevastopol. Russian forces were forced to retreat. This victory was a turning point in the war. Following the fall of Sevastopol, both sides were exhausted and ready to negotiate peace. The conflict had drained the resources of the nations involved, and thousands of lives had been lost. By March 1856, the Treaty of Paris was signed. The treaty ended the Crimean War. It limited Russian influence in the Black Sea and recognized the sovereignty of the Ottoman Empire. The war had reshaped the balance of power in Europe, strengthening Britain and France while reducing Russia's expansion in the region. The Crimean War demonstrated the importance of modern weapons, railways, and telegraph communication. It also showed the human cost of industrial warfare. Soldiers endured terrible conditions, and civilians suffered from the disruptions caused by armies moving through their lands. Even after the war, the effects were long-lasting. Medical reforms improved care for soldiers. Armies began to modernize, and political alliances shifted. The conflict left Europe with a new awareness of the dangers of war and the need for both strategy and diplomacy. The Crimean War is remembered not only for its battles and strategy, but also for the stories of courage, endurance, and human suffering. Ordinary soldiers, officers, nurses, and civilians all faced hardships that shaped their lives and the history of Europe in ways that would resonate for decades. After the fall of Sevastopol, both the Allied and Russian armies were exhausted, but the war continued to influence Europe in many ways. The fighting had demonstrated that modern warfare could be devastating not only on the battlefield, but also for civilians and entire regions. The lessons learned during the Crimean War would shape military planning, medicine, and diplomacy for years to come. During the final months of the conflict, the focus shifted to negotiations and maintaining positions. Britain and France worked closely with the Ottoman Empire to ensure that Russia would accept peace terms that limited its influence in the Black Sea and protected the independence of the Ottoman territories. Diplomats traveled between capitals, meeting in cities such as Paris and Vienna, attempting to balance the demands of each nation and prevent further bloodshed. Inside Russia, the war had exposed weaknesses in military organization and logistics. Armies suffered from poor communication, inadequate supplies, and harsh winters. Many soldiers who survived battles faced disease and starvation. News of these hardships spread quickly, creating pressure for the Russian leadership to agree to peace. Tsar Nicholas I, who had overseen much of the war effort, understood that further conflict would risk internal instability and economic collapse. The human cost of the war was enormous. Tens of thousands of soldiers on all sides had died in combat or from disease. Many civilians had fled towns near the front lines, abandoning homes and farms. Cities in Crimea, the Balkans, and other affected regions were damaged or destroyed. Families mourned lost loved ones, and communities struggled to recover after years of disruption. Medical practices had begun to change during the war. The work of Florence Nightingale and other nurses inspired reforms in how armies cared for the wounded. Hospitals were organized more effectively, hygiene was emphasized, and the treatment of disease became a priority. These changes saved countless lives in future conflicts and demonstrated the importance of planning and organization beyond the battlefield. The Crimean War also highlighted the role of technology in modern warfare. The use of railways allowed troops and supplies to move more efficiently. Telegraphs provided faster communication between commanders and governments. New weapons, such as rifled muskets and artillery, increased the range and accuracy of fire. These innovations made battles deadlier and required armies to adapt to new strategies. Politically, the war reshaped alliances and the balance of power in Europe. Britain and France strengthened their influence in the Mediterranean region, while Russia was forced to accept limits on its naval presence in the Black Sea. The Ottoman Empire, although weakened, survived as an independent state. This outcome delayed further Russian expansion and reinforced the importance of coalition building in European diplomacy. The experiences of soldiers, sailors, and civilians during the war created lasting memories and stories. Letters and diaries described the hardships endured, the courage displayed, and the moments of humanity that occurred even in the midst of violence. Ordinary people showed resilience, and many acted with kindness and compassion despite the suffering around them. For future generations, the Crimean War became a subject of study and reflection. Military leaders analyzed the battles, examining successes and failures to improve strategy and organization. Governments considered the importance of logistics, training, and support for both soldiers and civilians. Nurses and doctors studied the improvements in medical care, recognizing the value of sanitation, structured hospitals, and preventive measures. The war also had cultural impacts. Newspapers, illustrations, and books spread information about the conflict to wider audiences than ever before. The Crimean War was one of the first wars to be covered extensively by journalists and artists. People in Britain, France, and other countries followed the events closely, learning about the realities of modern warfare. This increased public awareness helped shape opinions about politics, leadership, and the costs of conflict. As the Treaty of Paris came into effect in March 1856, Europe entered a period of cautious peace. Nations began to rebuild, focusing on repairing cities, supporting families affected by the war, and restoring economies. Trade resumed, infrastructure was repaired, and armies slowly returned to peacetime duties. The lessons of the Crimean War remained in the minds of leaders and citizens alike. Even after the war ended, the influence of the conflict could be felt across the world. Modern military planning, diplomatic alliances, and medical practices all reflected experiences gained during these years of fighting. Soldiers, civilians, and leaders had all been tested by the hardships and challenges of the Crimean War, and the consequences of their decisions would echo in future conflicts. The Crimean War was not only a struggle over territory and power, but also a story of human endurance, resilience, and adaptation. It changed the way nations approached war, the way armies cared for their soldiers, and the way people understood the costs of conflict. It remains a significant chapter in European history, remembered for its battles, its suffering, and its lessons for generations to come. After the Treaty of Paris ended formal hostilities in March 1856, the impact of the Crimean War continued to be felt across Europe and the world. The conflict had changed the way nations prepared for war and how they treated their soldiers. Governments now understood that modern warfare required careful planning, organization, and attention to both military and civilian needs. Armies that were slow to adapt would face disaster in future conflicts. One of the lasting effects of the war was the transformation of military medicine. The work of Florence Nightingale and other nurses demonstrated that simple changes, such as clean water, proper ventilation, and organized care for the sick, could save thousands of lives. Her methods became standard practice in military hospitals, and they also influenced civilian hospitals in Britain and other countries. Nurses became recognized as essential members of medical care, and the profession began to gain respect and structure. The war also revealed the importance of logistics and supply. Armies could no longer rely solely on traditional methods of gathering food, ammunition, and equipment. Supplies had to be transported efficiently over long distances. Railways and steamships became critical to moving troops and resources. Armies learned that careful planning and coordination could determine the difference between victory and defeat. This understanding would shape military campaigns for decades. For Russia, the war was a harsh lesson in the limits of its power. Despite its size and resources, the Russian Empire had suffered heavy losses in men and equipment. Its defeat in Crimea exposed weaknesses in military organization, strategy, and leadership. The Russian government recognized the need for reform, and over the following years, it began modernizing its army, building railways, and improving communication. These changes were aimed at ensuring that Russia could compete with other European powers in future conflicts. In Britain and France, the war reinforced the value of alliances. Fighting alongside the Ottoman Empire demonstrated the strategic importance of cooperating with other nations to achieve common goals. These alliances also allowed Britain and France to maintain influence in the Eastern Mediterranean and prevent any one nation from dominating the region. The lessons learned in coordination, planning, and coalition warfare would be applied in later conflicts across the globe. The Crimean War also changed public perception of war. For the first time, journalists and war correspondents reported from the front lines. Newspapers published stories, letters, and illustrations that allowed citizens to see the realities of modern warfare. People learned not only about the heroism of soldiers, but also about the hardships, mistakes, and human suffering caused by conflict. This increased public awareness influenced governments, military leaders, and ordinary citizens, shaping opinions about war and diplomacy. Civilians who lived near battlefields or in occupied territories experienced enormous disruption. Homes, farms, and towns were damaged by armies moving through the region. Families fled to avoid fighting, and resources became scarce. Many people relied on the help of neighbors or the support of allied governments to survive. Even after the war, rebuilding communities took years. Fields had to be replanted, homes repaired, and trade routes restored. The social and economic effects of the conflict were felt long after the armies had left. The Crimean War also influenced military strategy in ways that would be remembered in future conflicts. The use of modern rifles, artillery, and defensive fortifications demonstrated that traditional tactics were no longer sufficient. Cavalry charges, once common, became less effective against entrenched positions and rapid-fire weapons. Commanders learned to value reconnaissance, intelligence, and careful planning. These lessons would shape armies across Europe in the decades that followed. Culturally, the war left a lasting legacy. Poems, books, and songs were written to honor soldiers, recount battles, and reflect on the human cost of the conflict. Artists created paintings and sketches that captured the harsh realities of war. The stories of courage, endurance, and sacrifice inspired future generations to remember both the bravery and the suffering of those involved. In the Ottoman Empire, the war strengthened the state in some ways. Its survival as an independent nation reinforced the idea that alliances and foreign support could help a declining empire resist conquest. At the same time, the empire faced challenges rebuilding its territories and maintaining stability. The Crimean War highlighted the need for modernization, both in military forces and in governance. For ordinary soldiers, the experience of the Crimean War left deep impressions. Many had endured hunger, disease, and harsh weather. They had witnessed comrades fall in battle or succumb to illness. Yet despite these hardships, soldiers showed resilience and courage. Their efforts helped secure victories, defend territories, and support allies. Letters and memoirs from soldiers describe their daily lives, the fear of combat, and the small moments of camaraderie that helped them endure the hardships. In the end, the Crimean War was more than just a struggle for territory or influence. It was a turning point in modern European history. It demonstrated the importance of alliances, logistics, and medical care. It showed the impact of technology on warfare. It revealed the human cost of war in vivid detail and influenced how nations prepared for future conflicts. The lessons learned from the Crimean War would resonate throughout Europe and beyond, shaping armies, governments, and societies for generations. Even after the Treaty of Paris in March 1856, the effects of the Crimean War continued to be felt across Europe, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire. The war had shown the vulnerability of nations, the importance of careful planning, and the tremendous human cost of modern conflict. Governments and armies spent years examining the lessons of the war, considering how to avoid the mistakes of the past while preparing for the challenges of the future. In Britain, the Crimean War had a lasting impact on the army and navy. Military leaders recognized that supply lines, transport, and communication were as important as battlefield tactics. The use of railways and steamships during the war showed how technology could dramatically change the speed and efficiency of operations. Armies began to train more systematically, ensuring that soldiers understood both strategy and discipline. At the same time, the bravery of ordinary soldiers was honored, and the value of training and leadership became widely recognized. In France, the war had reinforced the importance of strong alliances. Cooperation with Britain and the Ottoman Empire had been crucial to achieving victory. The French military learned the necessity of coordinating with other forces and adapting to different terrain, climates, and styles of warfare. The war also strengthened the French sense of national identity, as citizens had seen their country fight alongside allies to defend principles and maintain influence in Europe. Russia faced perhaps the most profound changes as a result of the conflict. The war had exposed weaknesses in leadership, communication, logistics, and military technology. Tsar Nicholas I, and later his successors, realized that reform was essential if Russia were to remain a major power. Over the following decades, Russia undertook significant military and social reforms. Railways were expanded, new training programs were implemented, and modernized weapons were developed. The lessons learned in Crimea influenced Russian military thinking well into the 19th century. The Ottoman Empire, despite being called the sick man of Europe, had survived the war and preserved its independence. However, it had suffered greatly from the conflict. Soldiers and civilians alike had endured hardship, disease, and destruction. The empire began to modernize its army and administration, learning from the experiences of the European powers. The war demonstrated that even declining states could survive if they adapted and worked with allies. The human impact of the Crimean War cannot be overstated. Thousands of soldiers died not only from combat, but also from disease, hunger, and exhaustion. Civilians living near battlefields faced destruction, displacement, and scarcity. Letters, diaries, and memoirs from the war describe families torn apart, villages abandoned, and towns damaged by the movement of armies. Yet these records also reveal moments of kindness, courage, and resilience. Soldiers helped one another, nurses cared for the wounded under difficult conditions, and ordinary people found ways to survive and support their communities. The war had also changed the public perception of conflict. It was one of the first wars to be widely reported in newspapers and illustrated for a broader audience. People across Europe saw the realities of modern warfare for the first time, including the suffering of soldiers and civilians, the dangers of disease, and the importance of strategy and preparation. This awareness influenced public opinion, politics, and military planning for years to come. The Crimean War also highlighted the evolution of military technology. Rifled muskets and artillery allowed greater accuracy and range. Trench warfare began to emerge as a necessary defensive measure, foreshadowing tactics that would become central in later conflicts. The war demonstrated that bravery alone was not enough. Planning, logistics, and technology were essential components of modern military success. Culturally, the war left lasting memories. Artists, writers, and historians captured the experiences of the conflict, recounting the heroism, suffering, and endurance of those involved. Stories of the charge of the Light Brigade and the siege of Sevastopol became symbolic of courage, sacrifice, and the costs of miscommunication in battle. Nurses such as Florence Nightingale became iconic figures, showing that compassion and organization could save lives even in the midst of war. By the late 1850s, Europe had entered a period of cautious peace, but the lessons of the Crimean War endured. Nations rebuilt their armies, strengthened alliances, and implemented reforms to prevent similar disasters. Soldiers returned home to recover. Families rebuilt their lives, and governments focused on stabilizing economies and infrastructure. The war had taken a tremendous toll, but it also provided knowledge that would shape military and political strategies for decades. The Crimean War was more than a struggle over territory or power. It was a pivotal moment in history that transformed the understanding of war, diplomacy, and human endurance. Ordinary people, whether soldiers, nurses, or civilians, faced unimaginable challenges yet showed resilience and courage. Armies learned the importance of logistics, communication, and strategy. Nations recognized that alliances, preparation, and adaptation were essential to survival. Ultimately, the Crimean War left a legacy that influenced military tactics, medical care, and international relations for generations. It demonstrated both the horrors of war and the capacity for human endurance, compassion, and ingenuity. Its lessons shaped the future of Europe and the world, reminding everyone of the profound consequences of conflict and the enduring strength of those who face it with courage and determination.